Well, good morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about FT8. I was originally going to go into how to set it up, some of the operations, and I changed my mind a little bit. I figure there's a lot of videos out there on YouTube. No point duplicating that. What I would recommend if you're trying to set it up for the first time is find some documentation or a YouTube video that talks specifically about the radio that you're using and how to connect that to the software WSJT/X. And once you get that set up, I found it fairly intuitive. Today, what I want to talk about a little bit is kind of how you get from your radio to contacts on WSJT. And just for a little bit of context, I've been a ham for about 3 years. About a year ago, a little more than a year ago, I got into FT8 and WJTX. It was back in February, using that FT991A and a little dipole, 20-meter dipole that I was hanging off of my deck. And since then, 1,200 QSOs, 90, almost 1,000 of them confirmed, 51 countries, mostly FT8. And this is a grid mapper just showing where some of those contacts were. So I don't do it a lot, but particularly in the wintertime, I really enjoy using the FT8. When I first got started, though, like I said, I started in February of 2022. I made a contact within about 10 days to South Africa. And I was just amazed that with about 75 watts, all of a sudden I was making a contact all the way to South Africa, almost 10,000 miles away. To me, that was just magic. And I've always thought of radio as magic, but that confirmed the whole context of the idea. Since then, I've reached out to South Africa several different times on FT8, both 20, 10 meters, and I have all the continents, and just really enjoy it. But even though it's magic, I really wanted to understand what the magicians were doing. That would be Joe Taylor and Steve Frank. So I thought I'd look in a little bit deeper under the hood to try to figure out how this was actually working. So I looked at a lot of different documentation, and I saw that, well, the first thing that the software does is it records a 15-second wave file. So I thought, well, maybe I'll look at one of those audio files and see what that looks like. Did a little bit more digging, and what I found was in the software, oops, I hit the wrong button. In the software, WSJTX, if you open the File tab, there's an Open tab. If you click on that Open tab, it'll open up a directory where those 15-second wave files are stored. And every wave file from every time you operated is in that file. I didn't check to see how many are in there, but there were a lot. So I thought, well, I'm going to look at one of those wave files. Yes. It's a 15-second wave file. I don't think they're very big, but I really don't know. I could check at break or something and let you know. They're not that big. I would recommend you take a look at that sometime and maybe clean it out, but I never did, but they're there. So I thought I'd go ahead and open up one of those wave files, and I was looking at how they're named, and they're basically named by the date and time that you made that run, if you will, on your WJTX. So I thought, well, maybe I'll look at that first contact that I made to South Africa, open up that wave file and just see what it looks like just for grins. So that's what I did here. I clicked open. This screen showed up. I clicked on this wave file and lo and behold, up came this screen on WSJTX. And in red there is the RR73 reception report and regard for that contact that I made February last year. So I was pretty impressed by that. But then I figured, well, what else can I do with that wave file? So then I went and, oh, this is the waterfall for that same contact. So you can take a look at it. The waterfall is basically the frequency domain of what's happening with that entire wave file and the data slice, if you will. So anybody who's used WJTX, those two screens ought to be fairly similar. We're also going to have a demonstration after I'm done that I'll go into some more detail if you want, if you have questions. But that's your waterfall and your frequency run. You have about 2,000 hertz worth of audio frequency data in that wave file. So I thought I'd look at the wave file. This is what it looks like in a program called Audacity. Audacity is a program that I use a lot for dealing with music files. It's open source, very quick to open, download, and I just drag and drop that file into the Audacity screen. This is what came up, and I'm not sure. Okay. Just barely. We can just barely hear it, but hopefully, yeah, exactly. So there's the characteristic FT8 audio tone that you're used to hearing. This is what it looks like in the time domain. So I went to Audacity. It has a tool up here called Analyze. You can pop that open and you can actually do a frequency domain run on this file. So I did that next. Oh. So this is the time domain up on top from Audacity. The bottom one is the frequency domain. Hopefully everybody can see around me. Is this better? I assume that that's all it's doing. It's very rudimentary. In fact, I'd like to redo all this with some real FFT software, maybe in MATLAB or something else. This was very rudimentary, but I was able to get the spectrum. I'm assuming it's an FTT, fast Fourier transform, but you can see the frequencies. And if you lay that alongside your WJTX waterfall and frequency, you can see that it matches fairly closely. Slightly different algorithms, but fairly close. This red line at 1594 is actually the received frequency for that QSO that I made to South Africa. And that's an interesting thing to note because it allows me to cheat in the next couple of slides. So from here, what I did was focus on that 1594 frequency. Well, actually, just to break this out, if you look at the 15-second waveform, what it consists of is a 15-second message, 12.64 seconds of which are actually the data, the remaining 3 seconds or so unused. Within that 12.64 seconds of message, there are 79 symbols. Each symbol is FT8, so it's one of 8 frequencies, or 0 to 7 different frequencies. They're 6.25 hertz apart. The first 7 one of those symbols is a sync set of symbols. The next 29 are data symbols. Then you have the same 7 sync signals repeated, another 29, and then 7 more sync signals. Those sync signals are what allow WSJTX to pull the individual messages out of the 20 or 30 that might be embedded in that audio file. And I'll show you kind of how that's done next. Any questions on how that's working? Okay, so the next thing that the WSJTX does is it divides that 15 seconds into 372 overlapping windows, and it takes a fast Fourier transform of each window. The windows are 0.16 seconds in length, which happens to be the same length as one of those data symbols, and it's overlapping. So if you look here, this row of FFT symbols basically matches the individual segments in that message, that 15-second message. So if you took that 15 seconds divided by 0.16 and put it into intervals, that's what you would see. Then the software duplicates that, but they delay it by a fourth, and they just continue to do that until they have 372 overlapping FFTs. So I thought, well, I wonder with Audacity if I could take a look at one of those blocks. I decided to choose this first one that mirrors the time interval associated with these 7 syncs. So I'm going to look at this little piece right here. Yeah, just that first interval, 0 to 0.16, right there. This is what the 0.16 audio piece looks like when you use Audacity and convert it into frequency. This is what you see. And once again, I cheated. I knew what the received frequency was for that message. So instead of backing into it, I just started with that, put the cursor on it right here. And you can see there's not a lot there relative to a lot of these stronger signals. Well, it's coming from South Africa. Do you have a question?
The red line is the actual carrier frequency.
That is correct. That is the 15 point, it's actually 15.94 carrier frequency that the FT8 message that I'm looking at for South Africa, that QSO is on. Yeah. So all of these would represent another carrier frequency for a different message in that interval. And once again, you can see just how weak the one that we're looking at is relative to a lot of these others. Oh. Can you see that, Jim? Okay.
So the signal is just that little blip down at the bottom of the red?
Yep, just that tiny little thing. You can barely see it. And that's actually not the carrier, that's the peak. So the other thing I can do with, well, so I put the cursor on the carrier, and then I was able to use something in Audacity that would find the peak closest to where the cursor is. So the peak is at 1608. So for interval 1, which is 0 to 0.16 seconds, I found a peak frequency at 1608. So ideally, if I was using FFT and other things, that might be the frequency for that first symbol of my sync message. So then I went and did it for the next 6 intervals. So this is the first one that I looked at, 1608. I repeated that for the second interval, 1604, 1618, 1555, 1619, 1620, 1605. Now we happen to know what that sync signal looks like because the magicians were very specific about what they were using for a sync signal, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But we know that that sync signal does not repeat any of those 8 frequencies. So each one of the frequencies is used once. So there's 8 frequencies. So I thought, well, I wonder what happens if I rank order these, because the frequencies themselves don't necessarily match what I'm interested in. But I went ahead and rank ordered them. And I found that in interval 1, we had, rank order 3, interval 2, rank order 1, 4, 0, 5, 6, 2. And you write those down and you compare with what WSJT is using to sync, you actually find that it matches very closely. So I found 3140562. FT8 uses a 7x7 Costas array. I'll talk about what that is, but it's basically 3140652. So it looks like, just using this very basic rudimentary Audacity software, I was able to get very close to my sync signal in that first 7 intervals. Yes. You know the signal strength through the FFT. The Audacity software gives it off to the side here, but you'd have to interpolate it. It doesn't give it as a printout or a data point. Yes. No, every message starts with that Costas array sync signal, and I'll show you how that works in just a second. But every message uses that same sync signal 3 times, at the beginning, at the end, and in the middle. What varies is the carrier frequency for each message. And I'll show you that in another slide. But let's talk about what that sync signal is and why it's kind of neat. It's part of the magic. So we found 3140562 closely related to the actual a signal of array of 3140652. So what's special about that Costas array? And this is the Costas array if you plot it as an array with time on the horizontal axis, the X, and frequency on the Y. And you'll see in interval 1, 3, 2, 4, 0, 6, 5, 7. That's the time and the frequency, and it's laid out as an array. The neat thing about it is you only have 1 frequency per time interval, so it works very well into the frequency shift keying 8 mode that the FT8 uses. In FT8, each one of these frequency intervals is 6.25 hertz. I wasn't able to get to that when I was looking at those peaks. It just didn't match, which means one of two things. I was either not in sync, and we'll talk about what that means. I didn't have the right starting time, in other words, or Audacity wasn't working the way I needed it to, and that's why I'd like to use an fast Fourier transform software. But I came close. But let's see why we use a Costas array and why that's kind of magical. Let's look at a 3x3 array. And graphically, I'm showing one on the left-hand side of this slide. And if we take a 3x3 array, kind of a tic-tac-toe screen, and the yellows represent a frequency 0, frequency 1, frequency 2, and time interval 0, 1, and 2. We end up with a 0, 1, 2 array. The Costas array is a 7x7. This is a 3x3, very similar. But if we try to create a detector that detects this, that's what this middle one is supposed to represent. The black is what you're not looking for. The white is what you're looking for. You can imagine taking this and slowly sliding it over until you're over the array. And when you're in perfect alignment, it's going to look something like this. And there's no other, well, yeah, there's no other arrangement that will work. It's in perfect sync. But what happens if you have a weak signal and one of these is missing? So let's say that the 0, 0, you just can't bring it out of the frequency spectrum. And so you just have two frequencies, the 1 and the 2. If you take that same mask that we were using, that same detector, and you do an overlay and you look for the maximum signal coming through, yellow in this case, you find that this works, but you can also slide it and this works. So you end up with two different solutions. It's ambiguous. And so if you were trying to use a sync signal in front of your message and you just use some random 7, 8, I guess it's 7 symbols, if you don't pick the right symbols, you can get an ambiguous result. So right. So you have those, I don't remember, 300 some little FT intervals. And it's basically going through each of those intervals and looking at the frequency spectrum. And for each peak that it's finding, it's trying to get to this Costas array frequency or sync signal. So it just keeps repeating. And that's one of the reasons why if you're using FT8 and you're in a hurry, you want to pick a carrier frequency that's on the low end because it gets to that and analyzes it quicker. Because just going sequentially. And I think I've got a slide that shows that a little bit better. If we go to our 3x3 array, and instead of having the 3 diagonals as our sync array, we change it a little bit, and now we have 0, 2, 1, 0, 2, 1. We now have a mask that looks like this, and they're no matter which one of these signals is lost, you will always have just one solution when you try to maximize the amount of energy or signal that that detector finds. So that's why they use the Costas array. The reason why they use the 7x7 matrix is because it works well with the 8-character frequency shift that we're using. So once again, this is just your Costas array that we're looking for. In terms of the 6.25 hertz audio tones, this is what that Costas array looks like. So for each peak, it's looking for this audio spectrum, basically. And it's moving in time and in frequency. The peaks represent the frequency. The time represents all of those FT8s that it's working on. So we're looking for 3140562. We found 3140652. That's 5 out of 7 tones we were able to pull out of that. We had a 71%, but we cheated a lot. We knew what the carrier frequency was, and we didn't look at the specific frequencies. We just looked to see where the relative peaks were. But we came up with a 71% solution. The decoder, once again, uses 3 sync arrays at intervals 0 to 6, 36 to 42, 72 to 78. And when it goes in and repeats this multiple times, if 7 or more tones out of 21 are found, which is 33%, it considers that to be in sync and that you've got a message. So 71% is pretty good, actually. So now we've located our message in time. We've located the carrier frequency. The next thing is to decode the other 58 data symbols that represent that message. But that's for another day, because until I get an FT fast Fourier transform software or something like that, I can't do it with Audacity. Manually, definitely not. But there are a lot of routines out there. I'm sure I can figure this out. So we'll do it another day, but we'll decode the actual message. Yeah, there's real good documentation. There's a QEX article that ARR put out that talks a lot about this. There's a couple of others. What I found, I was really struggling trying to understand this, and then I put in FFT and Costas array in my Google search engine, and up came a lot of good references. And it was only until I did that that I was able to kind of figure this out. Prior to that, it was all just gook, gobbledygook. Exactly. It took a lot to break it down to something simple that I could understand. But anyway, what I'd like to do for another meeting is maybe now get into the messages. I'd actually like to be able to find the sync without having prior knowledge of the carrier frequency, but find the message and then decode it a little more fuller. But that's another day. Any other questions? Yes. Yes, that's what this slide shows right here. Yes. Right. So I took this file, which is a audio file of the 15-second waveform. I clicked on it and the software decoded that audio file. Yes. Yes. And see, oh, right here, I was able to see what the 1594 carrier frequency was that then I used to cheat beyond that. But yeah, this is actually it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's about 25 decoded messages in that waveform. If you look at this. That one waveform. Right, and then this is the spectrum, the frequency domain. So each one of those peaks represents one of those messages. Some of them were pretty strong. The South Africa one was quite weak, minus 84 dB or so. So it's quite an effort that software does, and it does it quickly using fast Fourier transform to pull out each and every one of those contacts or messages from that audio file that has all of these frequencies embedded. It, right. That's correct. Yeah, so it'll take those 15 seconds, break it into 372 little increments. It'll start with FFT1, and it'll just start calculating, and it's looking for that Costas array. And whenever it starts to see something that looks like a Costas array, then it starts looking for a message and to decode. Right. It right.
But it usually snaps up in like about 1 second.
Yeah, it's incredibly fast, but it has basically you got alternating cycles between receptions. So it has 15, but it doesn't take 15 at all.
Tony, back to your previous slide, the overlapping FFT2, 3, and 4, that's an error correction.
Well, so you're not time synced when you're using your computer running weak signal, the software. There's not a universal time sync that everybody's using. So you've got your local time signal. The guy at the other end has whatever his local is off of his computer. So you have to sync up manually, which is what this is doing. So it's actually overlapping and looking for the strongest signal for that Costas array that it can find.
So it might end up using FFT3, 7, 11.
Right.
Third line.
And that might be why my frequencies didn't line up. If you look at this, what I was expecting between say interval 4 should have just been the carrier, but there wasn't even a peak at the carrier. And interval 2, I was expecting between here and here, 6.25 hertz would have been ideal. What I got was something else. If I looked at 2 and 3, I just can't find that 6.25 hertz in there, which probably means I'm not synced in time. And in fact, I was pretty new at this. My time differential was terrible. So that time differential was 0.6 seconds between my signal and the South Africa signal, and yet the FT8 software was able to decode it. Yes.
The reason that's red is because
Yeah, it's because he's responding to me. The software will automatically highlight that, and it has different colors. So the green is a CQ. So when you're sitting there and you're looking at it, those colors will jump out at you. Green is CQ. If I clicked on that, the software would automatically send a message to that station. There's colors that represent different DX codes and other things, just depends on how you set it. Yeah.
So what I remember from years ago is the JT65 requires that you have a really, really good time source and accurate clock on the computer.
Right.
In order to be successful. I think it was Bill who gave us a presentation on JT65. There was some discussion.
Right.
Various other things to get your computer clock accurate within exactly the window. So it sounds like you're saying that FT8 is kind of using a sliding window to do its own synchronization, so you don't need to quite so well synced up to
That is true. So you still want to have, and every reference I've read says, get as close to universal time as possible on your local machine, but you don't have to be that accurate because the software does this routine that we just talked about to find the start of that message for each frequency. Bill.
So maybe you just answered my question. You said earlier that it's on the same time. You're talking about fraction of a second difference.
Well, it could even be more, but ideally it's a fraction of a second. But once again, in my case, I was way off on all of these. I think the closest I was 0.3, well, 0. Go.
that's your clock compared to everybody else. So when you see everything negative like that, I mean, your clock is
Probably.
off compared to the average of everybody else.
Right.
I had a friend that, people would email you and say your clock is off. And I had a friend one time emailed Joe Taylor and said, how far off can it be before you have problems? And he said, within a second.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, we've got proof right here. This is a pretty strong message coming through, -9 dB, and it's almost a second off. So yeah, don't be real anal retentive about that DT. It's going to work better. You're going to pull out the weaker signals, but it'll work even if you're off. That's right. But if you see it coming through, even if they're off and you're on, the software's decoding it. Right, right. So you're synced up close enough. Um, and it's that Costas array, those 200 some FFTs. Yes.
I was gonna say, I ran a lot of FT8 when I was down in Florida, and typically what I would do, because I'm running on an old laptop, I would click on the bottom and then do.
Rob?
Sync, and it'd be fine. I never had any trouble.
Yeah, that's how I do it too. I haven't been able to find software to automatically do it that I like.
Just do it every time I start the computer.
Yeah.
I installed the Mindbird software and it never would work.
Right.
You know, errors. Finally uninstalled.
That's what I've had to do. I haven't found one that I like. Question. Yeah. Yeah. So you have an option. Um, of setting your receive and your transmit frequencies. Right now, I had them both set. Well, I don't know that I set them for this case. But I typically set them both the same, the receive and the transmit, but you don't have to. And right. But yeah, pretty slick. You've got that 15-second audio wave that has all of the information. It's stored, and the software slices it up and looks for the individual messages. And there's 25 that were decoded just here. So there's probably 30, 40 things going on in there. Some that it couldn't decode. And I'm amazed that it only needs 33% of those sync signals to come through in order to lock onto it. A lot of magic. I am not familiar with the other software. Yeah. Once again, I'm not familiar with the other. Well, that's a different mode that allows you to have a flexible payload. So it may not be as good with weak signal, because one of the advantages that FT8 has is it has a very defined message. So, well, that's a good topic for another program, I think. So, anything else? Do you have a sense of how this is working? It's magic. Yeah. It's just amazing how it can pull a weak signal out of all of that audio spectrum. It's magic. Okay, let's transition to a demo. How's that?
So I've got two things I can show you. One is what you're seeing now is my remote station. Well, actually, it's my home station, but I'm remote, obviously. So I've just connected to it remotely using Splashtop into my computer. And then I also have my iPad running here against the remote station out in Strasbourg. And I can show that to you if the video works when I try to switch it over. Anyway, I'm not going to go through a whole lot. First of all, just show of hands, how many of you folks have successfully used FT8? It's about 2/3. Okay, cool. Obviously, we could probably spend 3 hours just going through using FT8 and all the various things, but I'm just going to give you a few high points. Like Tony, and I know John too has done a ton of FT8. Now I've got 110 countries now from FT8, 2,400 QSOs. I mean, it's incredible. So yeah, it's a very successful mode. You know, one of the things though, of course, is that it's kind of like playing a slot machine. So that's where some people are kind of, well, you know, this is either the savior of ham radio or the murderer of ham radio. So take that away as you will. But for me, I mean, I used all the modes, and I like it mainly because you can do it from anywhere. Just last week I was in Florida, and I was on my iPad connected to the remote station from our condo in Florida, just playing along. I also did some SSB, by the way. But anyway, well, that's another topic for another day. So what you're seeing here, actually, I know it's kind of small. Maybe I can make this a little bigger. Bear with me 1 second here. Every time you change the resolution, you kind of run the risk of not being able to see all of it. But let's just pick something kind of in the middle here. Maybe that. That looks like it actually made it smaller. Okay, we'll just go with what we've got here. And so again, on the left, that's what's coming in. On the right is the activity or what's going out. The reason you're seeing red down there in the bottom is because I'm actually using the remote station on my iPad right now. So it's picking me up from the remote station saying, oh, that's you, and you're transmitting. It doesn't, know that I'm actually on a different radio. But a couple of quick tips here. One, so Tony had talked a little bit about the transmit and receive frequencies. So let me switch over to the band scope. Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, something is not happy. Uh-oh. That's not good. All right, bear with us. Okay, I was going to show you the band scope, so let me just bring that into focus here. Okay, so this is the band scope, and I've got it pretty wide here. I can actually make it a little bit bigger. There we go. I should have brought my mouse with me. Am I going the wrong direction? No, that's better. So see down here where it says bins per pixel, just as a little tip, you can make it smaller, and that shows you a smaller amount of the bandwidth that's available, or you make it larger, which will show you even more. So here we're seeing, I'm starting at about 500 hertz because I regularly or rarely operate anything below that. And then you can see all the way up to about 1600 or so. Now, in this case, what you're seeing, and this looks a little different than usual, but basically, if we're looking at either the waveform or the actual waterfall here, when you're transmitting, you want to find a spot where nobody else is transmitting, right? It's just like when you're running phone, right? You don't want to sit on top of somebody else and try to talk over them. Well, same thing's true here. In this case, though, instead of looking at the transmit frequency, we're actually looking at that slice of the bandwidth that we want to transmit on, right? So generally, I just kind of go around here and I try to find an empty spot that's, doesn't have any traffic going. And you can just right click and hit set, receive, and transmit offset. And now you see the little mark there. All right, so now let me switch back over to FT8. Okay, there we go. All right, so now you'll notice down here where it's showing the transmit and the receive frequency that I chose. Now, big tip here, see where it says hold transmit frequency? If you don't check that, when you respond to someone, it will automatically shift your transmit frequency to the person you're responding to, which conceivably is fine, right? Because they're listening, it's the time you're transmitting, right? Because you're alternating time slots. The problem is that if you got a pileup going, it's going to be you versus everybody else trying to transmit and switch to that guy, and they may not hear you. But if you hold your transmit frequency and you're in a slot that's free, they'll still hear you and you won't have to be participating in that pileup as much, right? Which I think was what you were saying earlier, right? So that's one big tip. Another big tip that I found, if you come in here under your settings, and not all radios will do this. It's probably on my other screen. I've got two screens set up here, so I have to switch. Come on, go away. Zoom is trying to be very helpful here. Stop it. Okay. Takes a second to switch. Okay. And again, this is hard to read, but if you go to the radio tab, see down here where it says split operation, and there's three choices: none, rig, and fake it. What that means, it's like when you're running split on any other mode, right? You can have it shift your transmit frequency by a certain amount of hertz or kilohertz, depending on what it's doing. But what it's doing is that especially as you get higher up in the frequency band or in the transmit frequency, what it will do is it will shift your transmit frequency just a little bit to accommodate for that higher frequency. And I don't fully understand the physics behind that, but it will use your rig to compensate for some of the losses from the higher frequencies that you're using, right? So if you can use that, that will just help your overall fidelity, is what I'm trying to say here. Now, rig means that, so when it's doing cat control on your rig, it means that it will send the message to your rig telling it to shift the transmit frequency. And you'll see that on your display, of course, when you're transmitting. If your rig doesn't support that, you can do fake it. And fake it, I think, actually changes the FT8 transmit frequency as opposed to your rig's transmit frequency. But most modern rigs that have cat control, you can set the transmit frequency. So you can just set rig on that. Okay. So that's one tip. Now, another tip is try not to do Zoom while you're doing FT8. Okay. All right. So right now, a couple tools too. So the other thing I do when I'm running FT8 is, it's good to know, obviously, what band you should be on. And there's a bunch of little tips that I use to help figure that out. So let me show you those before we actually get into it here. So I'll go back to my other screen, bring up my web browser. So the first thing I always, and I'm sure everybody knows this, but QRZ has a great little display here that shows the current conditions, right? And so the big thing, obviously, as you want to look at, and this is a great day, right? Because we've got high SFI, high sunspot number, and our noise level is very quiet. So this should be ideal for any kind of communications. And then also I look at the MUF, which is weird. Yeah, for those of you that don't know what the MUF is, it's a maximum usable frequency, and it's at 15 megahertz right now, which is really odd. I have noticed that this feed is not always accurate, and it also goes down. So I wouldn't take this as gospel, just as a guideline. But in any event, everything else looks pretty good from this perspective. So now, which frequency should we use? Well, I have this neat one website that I use called DX Heat. So if you just go to dxheat.com/DXC, you'll get this display. You just have to make sure that you select North America because it defaults to Europe. But this shows a heat map as well as an activity map. So you can select all of the bands that you're interested in over here or deselect them, as it were. And that just affects this stuff in the middle. So this is sort of a running list of who's making contacts. And you can select which modes too, CW, phone, and digital. I have it just set for digital right now. But the thing I really like to look at is on the right here. So this band activity shows a heat map of where it's seeing the most activity by band. So on the left hand, here's the frequency, or the not frequency, but the wavelength, but from 6 to 160. So right now, as you can see, like 15 is pretty hot to Europe as well as North America. We got a little bit of activity in Asia. 20 is mostly North America, and so on. So 15 right now, like if we want to work Europe, looks like 15 is the place to be. 6 is also pretty hot. So let me just skip back over here to our FT8 screen. And conveniently, I happen to be on 15 already. So yeah, at this point now, we're in pretty good shape. As far as the actual mechanics of running FT8, I mean, I could do one here if you want. I think it might be better to give you a couple of ideas though, as far as different modes that you can use with WSJTX. FT8, of course, is the most popular. FT4, which you can get to just by selecting mode here at the top and going to FT4, is virtually identical to FT8, but it's designed for contesting, and it uses, I think, about twice the bandwidth that FT4 does, which means you can get away with a much faster cycle. Right, so it's half the time between cycles, which is really great, except for not as many people use it, and because it's using more bandwidth, it's not as sensitive as FT8 is. Okay, so, but FT4 is a lot of fun because it's definitely a lot snappier, a lot faster turnaround. And I don't think we're really even seeing much on FT4 here. Another tip, by the way, under the decode menu here, see where it says fast, normal, and deep. If you have any kind of a normal modern computer, go with deep. What that means is it's spending a little more time doing that processing, doing that decoding. If you have a slower machine and it can't keep up or whatever, and you can tell because it just keeps getting slow when it's decoding, then go to one of the other two. But literally every computer I've ever used, including a Raspberry Pi, works fine on deep. But that is not the default. I think fast is the default, if I remember right. So that's another great tip. Yeah, so now if I want to transmit a CQ, the first thing I do, of course, is go to the band scope. Well, either way, I go to the band scope and I find an empty slot to center my transmit on. I don't worry about the receive frequency because when you respond to somebody, it automatically shifts to that frequency, and it doesn't really matter because you'll hear everything across the entire band anyway. But transmit frequency is really key. Let's see what else. Oh, yeah, I'll do that in 1 sec. One other thing, see here where it says transmit, even, and first. So as you may know, the way FT8 works is you either transmit on the odd seconds or on the even seconds, right? So like if you look here, see all these people, you can see their timestamps. So like you've got a bunch of people that are at 0, and you got some other people that are on like 15 and so on. So you can figure out, like, say you're chasing somebody, say you need a country, right? And so you want to chase them, and you don't necessarily have to wait for them to call CQ. And that's another tip I'll get to in a second here. But what you need to do in order to guarantee success, think about it this way. So say that I'm chasing this person from Belgium and he's on 00. Okay, so that's even. Well, if I transmit on even, guess what? He's never going to hear me, right? Because that's when he's transmitting. So you have to figure out whether they're even or odd and then select the opposite for your transmit. Okay, so this guy is odd. Right now I have transmit even / first unchecked, which by definition means that I'm even, right? So that's good. If it was the other way around, I would need to check this to tell it that I want to transmit on, I think I just said it backwards, but you get the idea. So if it's checked, I'm going to transmit on the even times. So the person I'm talking to must be transmitting on odd and vice versa, right? Does that make sense to everybody? I'm trying not to confuse everybody too much here.
Even is 0 to 15.
Yeah. Well, no, it's 0, 3, 5, 7, 9 is odd. or no, 13579 is odd, 02468 and so on is even. So yeah, just whether that last digit here is even or odd. So that's all you need to really think about. Yeah, exactly. Oh, and then speaking of the time, see the DT here, Tony talked about this. This is the time differential between yourself and the other person. Every once in a while, you'll see 1.2 or something, but you rarely see much more than 1 second time difference. And so again, just reinforcing how important that is to make sure your computer's time is dead on. And what I found on some of my computers over the years is that you know, when you first boot up, it's supposed to do a time sync, but doesn't always if you use the default Windows time sync, because it does it every once a day or something. And so I did go with a time sync application here, which runs every hour or something like that. Let me see if I can find it here. Forget which one it is. That Zoom. Well, maybe I don't have it running right now. Yeah, but anyway, there are a number of free time sync applications that will run like every hour. You can even have it run every minute if you want to. That's a little, you know, over the top. But if you do it once an hour or so, that will make sure that you're dead on. And what will happen is if you have an older computer with, you know, these all have a CMOS battery in there that keeps the time when you shut the machine off. If that battery is going, a lot of times the real-time clock will start to slip. Okay, and so in fact, that's what happened with this computer when I got it from you at the hams the swap fest. It worked great, but when I shut it down and came back up, FT8 wouldn't work at all, and it's because the battery was weak on the backup. And so as soon as I put in the sync application, then it started working perfectly. And then down the road, I just put another battery in, which cost about $3, so it was no big deal. But just again, it was very, very important. If you're not getting success with FT8 and FT4 and JS8 for that matter, make sure your time is dead on. That's probably the biggest tip anybody can have. And I don't know why we have pictures on here, but anyway. Okay. One more tip. When you're running remote FT8 like I am here, one of the things I like to do, you know, FT8 itself can talk directly to most modern radios. So like I have an IC7300, and I just plug the USB in, install the drivers, and I was off to the races. But when you're running remote, there's only certain things you can do through FT8 to remotely control it. For example, if you want to vary your power levels, you can't do that through FT8, your transmit power. So instead, what I like to use is FLRig, which is a free utility, which you see down here in the corner. FLRig then does the connection to my rig, and you can see I have all the sliders here. I can turn the tuner on and off. I can change the power output levels. I can turn noise reduction on and off, all kinds of great things that you can't do remotely from within WSJTX. Yeah, Tony. Yeah, Ham Radio Deluxe is also another good solution for that, for sure. And I think HRD also does FT8 built into it, right? Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. So there's a number of different things. The only difference from configuring it when you're using like FLRig is you have to tell it to use FLRig instead of trying to talk directly to your rig. But this is great. Again, if you're remote, you can do almost everything that you can from that you could sitting in front of the radio remotely, which is super nice. And what I do, like I have my ham shack down in my basement, and sometimes, you know, when I'm working, if I'm sitting in a boring conference call or something, I'll fire up FT8 downstairs. I'll just remote into it, you know, and it's just so convenient to be able to do that from anywhere, right? So that's my slot machine, as I like to call it. Okay. There was one other tip I was going to use. Oh, logging. Logging can be kind of complicated with FT8. And, you know, of course, if you want to get credit, you know, you get like the DXCC awards and all those sorts of things, you have to figure out how to do logging from WSJTX. what I found the easiest thing to do. So what happens is you can set it up so that it automatically prompts you to log a QSO when it completes. So that's great. You just, fill in your transmit power and it fills everything in for you and you just hit OK. Behind the scenes, what it's doing is it's creating an ADIF file. You can get to that if you go to File and you select Open Log Directory. It will actually show you that, which probably just went to my other screen. Yeah, so here's your log directory. And then basically the easiest way to find it is it ends in .adi, or you can look at the timestamp. But that's the file that you need. Now, what I have found, the two biggest logging systems that I use is QRZ, and I also use Logbook of the World, which is ARRLs. LOTW is a freaking nightmare if anybody's tried to use that. But anyway, what you can do, you can very easily upload your ADIF file to QRZ. You do have to, I think you have to pay for their subscription. It's their API subscription, which is like $30 a year. But basically, you can just upload the entire ADIF file to QRZ, and that all just magically shows up in your logbook. And a lot of people using FT8 do that same thing, and so you get confirmations and stuff, and it's pretty cool. Now, if you want to integrate it on the backside with Logbook of the World, first of all, you have to set up a LOTW account, and you have to get this magical certificate, which is part of the setup process. But literally, once you've done that, you go back to QRZ, you upload that certificate, and then QRZ can automatically push all of your QSOs to Logbook of the World. So you don't have to screw around with their software or anything. It does it for you. And it will also pull all the confirmations, because some people only use Logbook of the World. Other people only use QRZ. So you really kind of need to do both if you want to make sure you're getting all your QSOs acknowledged. So you literally can just do it all from QRZ. Upload your ADIF file, push it to Logbook of the World, and then pull the confirmations from Logbook of the World, and everything's happy. And I know I'm going through this really fast. Oh, good question. Yeah, the question was, is the pull part automatic? No, it's manual. You go, and here's QRZ. You just go to your call sign, go to your logbook, click on settings, and you come down here. Here's where you import your ADIF file. You just basically click that, and then you hit choose file, and you find the directory where your ADIF file is, which is right there. In fact, I can just do it right now while we're talking here. Open, hit import. So now it's uploading the ADIF file to QRZ. And I have a pretty large ADIF file, so it's going to take a few seconds to finish. Then once this is done, then it takes it from there. Basically all your QSOs will show up on the log, and it will match up anybody that's also had a QSO with you through QRZ. Now to yeah. Yeah, you really need to do both, And if you think about it, people are trying to get awards and things, they're depending on you to also submit your QSOs because they have to match in order for them to count, right? So now I've got the Logbook of the World set up here on the right. So literally, I just hit export. And then you have a little password. And once you put it in there, it saves it. And you just literally just hit export to Logbook of the World. It only exports the new QSOs. So this tends to be a little bit faster. So yeah, it just sent 2 records. And then if I want to get confirmations back, I literally just go back into settings and I hit import. And that will pull my confirmations from Logbook of the World into QRZ. So now I've done that bi-directional. It'd be nice if they just had one button where you could push, but it's 2 buttons instead. So I just got 4 new confirmations.